One of the biggest obstacles standing in the way and weighing people down is American chauvinism. The disgusting notion that America and Americans are better and more important than everybody else. This is a poison infecting people broadly in this country, even among the bitterly oppressed. And there is a great need for people to break with this American chauvinism.
Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is October 6th, 2022, and this is our 122nd episode. My name is Sunsara Taylor, and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Andy Z, our main host, will be back next week. This is a show about a real revolution, the actual overthrow of the monstrous system of capitalism-imperialism that rules over people here and all over the world. A system which right now, in addition to all its other monstrous crimes, is pushing the world dangerously close to nuclear war. A moment ago, at the very opening of the show, you heard briefly from Bob Avakian, the most important political leader and thinker in the world today, and you will hear more from him throughout today's episode. Bob Avakian is the architect of the new communism, and he is completely different than the endless stream of bourgeois politicians who are put forward as leaders, whose goal is to maintain one variation or another of this system of capitalism-imperialism that is founded on and perpetuates itself through cruel and literally life-stealing exploitation, murderous oppression, and massive destruction in all parts of the world. BA is a revolutionary who bases himself on the scientific understanding that this system must finally be overthrown through an organized struggle involving millions of people, and replaced with a system that is oriented to and capable of meeting the most fundamental needs of humanity and enabling humanity to become fit caretakers of the earth. This real revolution is a mission that you and many more people need to take up and be on fire to spread. And this is what we invite you into each week here on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. We want to start today's show out talking about the high stakes in Ukraine, the threat of nuclear war, and the interests of humanity. Then we will share an illustrated portion of Bob Avakian's memoir read by him on the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. This will be important history for many of you who do not know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, another time when the rulers of this country took the world dangerously close to nuclear war. But this segment is also more than that. It'll be a window into BA's life and development, a way to get to know this revolutionary leader. And there is much to learn from the approach he took even as a youth, his concern for humanity, his determination to find out what was true. As you watch, think about just how urgently people need to take this same approach today. From there, I'll bring you a segment on the growing move among those attacking the right to abortion in this country to legally classify fetuses and even fertilized eggs as full human beings, and the devastating consequence that this would have on women. This will be followed by a segment from Prose, a member of our team here, taking on the vicious hatred of women pumped out by Andrew Tate, a perverse icon of today's violent macho culture. And after that, we'll hear from Bob Avakian for a second time with a searing excerpt from his 2012 talk, from which we take the name of this show, Revolution Nothing Less. The portion of his speech is on resisting the brainwash, a radical revolt against a revolting culture, and the excerpt is titled Rebelling Against Guy Culture, Fighting to End All Oppression. Finally, a few quick words on the righteous uprising in Iran that continues to rage, and a song from Outernational with guests Shekib Mosadeq and Baran Sajadi. But first, as a point of bedrock orientation, let us hear just a bit more from the clip with which we began today's episode.
One of the biggest obstacles standing in the way and weighing people down is American chauvinism. The disgusting notion that America and Americans are better and more important than everybody else. This is a poison infecting people broadly in this country, even among the bitterly oppressed. And there is a great need for people to break with this American chauvinism. Free yourself from the GTF, the great tautological fallacy. A fallacy, an idea or way of thinking that is false, wrong. A tautology, a round in a circle way of reasoning that asserts something and then claims to prove it by merely asserting the same thing again. So the great tautological fallacy to which I am referring is the notion that America is a force for good in the world, and therefore whatever it does is good, or at least done with good intentions, even if the same thing, when done by other forces, especially by forces opposed to us, is bad, is evil, because America is a force for good in the world. Thus, in the grip of the great tautological fallacy, when one is told by the authorities and government and the media, etc., that North Korea developing a small number of nuclear weapons and a few long-range ballistic missiles poses a grave threat, one does not question. One does not ask why that is a grave threat, while the only country ever to use nuclear weapons, the United States, having thousands of nuclear weapons and the capability to use them anywhere in the world, is somehow not a grave threat.
For those of us who are not willing to be blinded by this GTF, we can and must confront and analyze reality as it actually is and draw the necessary conclusions. Besides the fact that the US is today and has historically been allied with many authoritarian governments throughout the world, and in fact has forcibly installed such governments in many countries, the even more fundamental fact is that the essence of the conflict between the US and countries like Russia and China is not one between democracy and authoritarianism, but is a matter of rivalry among imperialist powers, all of which are monstrous oppressors of masses of people, and none of which represent or act in the interest of humanity. What is called for, and urgently now, is to oppose all imperialist marauders and mass murderers, and all systems and relations of oppression and exploitation, while giving particular emphasis to opposing our own imperialist oppressors who commit their monstrous crimes in our name, and seek to rally us to support them on the basis of a grotesque American chauvinism, which we must firmly reject and fiercely struggle against.
The high stakes in Ukraine, the threat of nuclear war, and the interests of humanity. 4 basic points. Number 1, the threat of nuclear war, of World War III, is real and it is growing more likely by the day. Last week at revcom.us we wrote that, quote, the war in Ukraine has escalated to a perilous new phase. The danger of nuclear exchange is greater and more explicitly stated than ever by political leaders on both sides of the war, Russia on the one side, and on the other, Ukraine, backed by the US and NATO. In just the past week, this conflict has gotten significantly more dangerous. There are mounting threats, including threatening the use of nuclear weapons, ground offensives, and accelerating military maneuvers on both sides. We urge everyone to go to revcom.us and read the resources and analysis provided there. Number 2, this is an imperialist showdown. This is not a fight between good guys versus bad guys. Ukraine is not a battleground between democracy and autocracy. It is a conflict zone of imperialist rivalry between Russian imperialism and US and Western imperialism. Both are fighting to impose their will on the other, to advance the interests of their empire at the expense of the other, and at the cost of tens of thousands of lives lost, with the looming threat of crushing and incinerating millions more. For more analysis and history of this situation, including several articles by Bob Avakian, again, go to revcom.us and the Special War on Ukraine resource page. Number 3, the Democratic Party is a machine of massive war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Democrats are not the party of peace. Their entire record is one of bloody war crimes and crimes against humanity. They have demonstrated over and over again that they have no hesitation at all when it comes to killing millions of people in the interests of the U.S. empire. The Democrats are the party of nuclear bombs dropped on densely populated cities, the party of napalm, jellied gasoline that burns to the bone, dropped on children. They are the party of drone strikes on wedding parties. And now, under Democratic Party leadership, this country is bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. It is way past time for people to stop being a tail on this Democratic donkey. Number 4, this whole dynamic must be urgently, radically changed in the interests of humanity, not in the interests of rival and contending imperialists. People can't stand by passively and hope for the best. They need to be challenged and to think deeply about the truth of these words by Bob Avakian. He said, "All this emphasizes why it is vitally important for the masses of people in this country and other countries aligned with it, as well as in Russia, for people everywhere to finally and fully wake up now, recognize the real and profoundly heavy stakes involved, and act in accordance with our actual interests, the interests of all of humanity, demanding that this war in Ukraine and the involvement, direct and indirect, of the imperialists on both sides in this war be stopped before it not only causes even greater suffering for the people of Ukraine, but possibly escalates into a far more terrible conflict, which causes massive destruction and death on a whole other level, and even possibly poses a threat to the very existence of humanity itself. We urge every one of you watching right now to spread far and wide these slogans everywhere you can. No US-NATO war with Russia. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. We don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution."
President Kennedy's urgency in launching his blockade underlined a determination to prevent at almost any cost Cuba's missile buildup.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
The Cuban Missile Crisis. World in the balance.
Once again, the White House and the executive it shelters commands the interest of the world. Attention that's riveted on the signing by President Kennedy, Cuba.
During the acute period of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, those events and their implications loom much larger, even in my own mind, than my own situation of being sick. Everybody sensed to one degree or another, certainly anybody who was paying any attention, and most people were, they couldn't help it, that the world could literally end at any time. I still remember feeling very, very deeply, right down into my bones, that the whole world could come to an end. At that time, I was back on a restricted schedule in school, but I followed this whole thing very intensely. Of course, they always give you only the U.S. imperialist side of the picture, and that's what people get drummed into them. I remember this dramatic incident that they still like to replay from time to time, when Adlai Stevenson, who was the U.S. representative to the United Nations, gave this speech where he showed these photos of the Soviet missiles that had been brought into Cuba. And then he turned to the Soviet ambassador and said, "Are those or are those not Soviet missiles in Cuba?"
Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no.
"I can wait here till hell freezes over, Mr. Ambassador."
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over.
The Soviet ambassador wouldn't answer, and Stevenson just kept saying, "Are they or aren't they, Mr. Ambassador?" On and on like that, putting him on the spot. But they never show how a year before that, at the beginning of the Kennedy administration, Adlai Stevenson got up and vehemently denied in the United Nations that the U.S. had anything to do with the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba.
These charges are totally false, and I deny them categorically.
Which, of course, was a blatant lie. So they like to show the one thing on TV as a highlight from history, but not the other thing where Stevenson was overtly lying in front of the whole world. At the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy put a naval blockade around Cuba and said that if any Soviet ship tried to break that blockade, that would be an act of war, and the U.S. would respond. Kennedy tried to justify this, and I remember this very clearly, by claiming that the Soviet Union had violated the UN Charter by putting missiles in Cuba.
In flagrant and deliberate defiance of the Rio Pact of 1947, the traditions of this nation and hemisphere, the joint resolution of the 87th Congress, the Charter of the United Nations.
Now, even though I had a lot of suspicions about the government already at that time, and even though I was very angry about a lot of injustices in American society, and especially the oppression of black people, I still wanted to believe in my government. I still wanted to believe that the government could at least be brought around to doing the right thing. And I didn't want to believe that on something where literally the fate of the world was involved, they would just openly lie to everybody. But I felt strongly, with the fate of the world up for grabs and hanging by a thread, that I have to know the truth here. So I went to the university library and I dug out the UN Charter, remembering that Kennedy said it was a violation of the UN Charter for the Soviet Union to have missiles in Cuba. I read the whole charter through, and I naively expected I would find a statement in the charter that would say, "It is a violation of this charter for the Soviet Union to have missiles in Cuba." Of course, I didn't find anything of the kind. So then I started looking into it further. Well, does it say it's a violation for one country to put missiles into another country? Of course, there wasn't anything like that in the charter either. And as I later found out, the U.S. had missiles all over the place, including in Turkey. And even though the ones in Turkey were older generation missiles, they were still missiles that could set off nuclear devices. These missiles in Turkey were closer to the Soviet border than Cuba was to the U.S. border. But they weren't talking about that either in the U.S. media. I kept looking for anything in this UN Charter that would justify what Kennedy was saying about how this was a violation of the Charter. I read that Charter over and over, and I couldn't find anything. Kennedy was just lying. He was really saying, we can do whatever we want, and nobody can do anything we don't want them to do. That was the logic he was using then, and that's the logic that right up to Bush they use now. Some of my favorite lines from Bob Dylan are in the song where he talks about trying to get in a nuclear fallout shelter, and the owner says, "Get out of here. I'll tear you limb from limb." Then the next lines are, "I said, you know, they refused Jesus too. He said, you're not him." The way of thinking or not thinking that Dylan captured there. The inability or unwillingness to engage in abstract thought and to abstract from one situation to another. The refusal to be consistent in applying a principle. What applies to you doesn't apply to me. I can do what I want, and you can't do it if I don't want you to. That same sort of "you're not him" or "you're not me" logic was being applied by Kennedy. And this was a big shock to me. I knew some things about injustices in American society, but lying on this level, lying before the world with the fate of the world literally at stake, was more than I expected. It may have been unusual to actually go and pore through the UN Charter, but there was so much at stake that I felt like I have to know the truth, and just because it's the leader of my country, I can't accept what he says when something this big is at stake. Of course, this didn't immediately cause me to become a communist. I was still against communism as much as I understood it, which was very little. But it shook me up a lot and kept circulating in my mind as other events, like Vietnam a little later, unfolded. The Cuban Missile Crisis and things like the fair housing struggle contributed to my feeling that there were important things in the world, and I should do something about those things. I should do something important with my life when I got my life back. I still had the passion that I had for sports and things like that, but that was something you do for entertainment and fun. I mean, your life could be about that, and I always thought that if I hadn't ended up being a communist, maybe I would have been a high school basketball coach. But I was feeling that my life should be about something more than sports, as much as I still had a real passion about that. I felt that there were so many big things going on in the world, I wanted to do something with my life that would mean something, or to use the phrase of the time, be relevant, and not just be a personal passion for me.
He has repeatedly referred to pregnant women as hosts.
When I use the term host, it's not meant to degrade women. I actually went and Googled that, and I went to Webster, and I couldn't find a better term.
The law also recognizes an embryo as a life.
The so-called personhood bill would give embryos and fetuses all the rights and immunities of other citizens.
An unborn baby would be counted in Colorado's criminal code.
The fetus is now a legal person.
Could have women facing the death penalty for having an abortion.
The state of Georgia recently passed a law that said a woman who is 6 weeks pregnant or more can claim the fetus as a dependent and get a $3,000 break on her taxes. This may seem strange, or even like a harmless perk for women who are going through the burden of pregnancy. But this is part of something huge, something enslaving for women. This is part of a very serious move to establish fetuses and even fertilized eggs from the moment of conception as full people in the eyes of the law. And let's be very clear, fetuses are not people, not morally, not socially, and not scientifically. But this is not just a Georgia thing. This is the program of the Christian Fascists for the whole country.
We must resolve that we will not rest, we will not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state in the nation.
So what would it mean if this country legally classified fetuses and embryos as people? First of all, this would mean that all abortions in all circumstances would be criminalized. No exceptions for rape or incest, no matter how young a girl might be. No regard for women's own plans for their lives that would be shattered by forced motherhood. No regard for the decimated dreams, the foreclosed lives, and the patriarchal violence or the threat of such that would be heaped on all women everywhere. But that's not all. If fetuses were granted the legal rights of people, women who are pregnant will be denied life-saving care if that treatment might endanger the fetus. Let us never forget Savita Halappanavar of Ireland or Isabella Sajbor of Poland, both of whom died slow and agonizing, completely preventable deaths while having miscarriages in hospitals because those countries' anti-abortion laws prevented the doctors from intervening.
This was Savita Halappanavar celebrating the Diwali Festival of Lights with her husband Praveen. They lived together in the Irish town of Galway. Now she's a newspaper headline. She became pregnant, but at 17 weeks went into hospital in pain, miscarrying. The hospital wouldn't carry out an abortion. This is a Catholic country, a medic apparently told them. She died of blood poisoning in agony.
Isabella was married for 10 years and was the mother of a 9-year-old child. She was expecting another. She was taken to this hospital in southern Poland in September with a serious complication to her pregnancy. Isabella described her worsening condition in a text message to her mother, saying,
"The baby weighs 485 grams. For now, because of the abortion law, I have to lie down. They can't do anything. They're going to wait until he dies or something else happens. Oh, and also, I could die of septic shock."
Isabella did die of just that, and 24's Observer's team were informed by her family's lawyer that doctors decided not to terminate the pregnancy for fear of being held responsible for an illegal abortion.
And even that is not all. Granting fetuses the full rights of people would mean that killing a fetus would be treated the same as killing an actual person. Women who terminate their pregnancies and those who help them, whether doctors and medical staff or loving families or anyone else, would be charged with murder and sent to prison. In places that allow the death penalty, they could be put to death. Think that sounds too extreme? That it can't happen here? Earlier this year, lawmakers in Louisiana pushed for a law that would have classified abortion as homicide and allowed women and those who helped them to be executed.
A new bill moving through the Louisiana legislature would classify abortions as homicide.
Women could be charged with murder if they abort their pregnancy.
Of House Bill 813, which would redefine person as including a human being from the moment of fertilization. This would extend homicide laws to the unborn, meaning a woman who had an abortion could be charged with murder.
Could have women facing the death penalty for having an abortion.
And in Arizona, right now, the courts are deliberating over a law that would grant fertilized eggs the same rights, privileges, and immunities available to other persons.
The 2021 statute essentially gives all legal rights to unborn children.
And you can count on law enforcement to then start treating women who suffer from miscarriages as if they are murderers as well. Let's look at El Salvador. Women there are routinely arrested right out of the hospital and sent to prison, many of them languishing for decades for miscarriages and stillbirths. One high school rape survivor was sentenced to 30 years in prison after having a stillbirth in the bathroom. She had been repeatedly raped by a gang member and didn't even know she was pregnant, yet she was charged on the grounds that failing to seek prenatal care amounted to murder. And on top of this, the court considered charging her mother as an accomplice as well. Again, don't say it cannot happen here. The group National Advocates for Pregnant Women has documented 1,331 arrests or detentions of women for crimes related to their pregnancies between 2006 and 2020. And all this was before the fall of Roe. Treating fetuses as full people in the eyes of the law has been the program of the Christian Fascists for decades, and it is the logical conclusion of calling abortion murder for years and years and indoctrinating generations of religious fanatics and many people more broadly with this lie. Recently, the New York Times did a podcast exposing the growing demand in the anti-abortion movement to treat women who get abortions as murderers. They showed how this is not just anti-abortion leaders, but women themselves who have had abortions, who have been indoctrinated and brainwashed with this view. Listen to this woman named Christine, as she explains that she agrees she really ought to be prosecuted for murder and even put to death if that's what the law decides for the abortion she had as a teenager decades ago.
Well, how do I feel about it? I feel it is extremely just and it's biblical and it's fair. It's an equal measure. I took a life. I should give my life. If they were to come back and I would, right now, I absolutely would go to court and say, yeah, I'm a sinner. I did it. And if that was my punishment, I would take it. If that was my punishment, I would take it.
Again, this is the logical conclusion of spreading the lie that abortion is murder. And this logical conclusion has been aided and conceded to every time the Democrats and the so-called pro-choice leaders who are slavishly tied to these Democrats have insisted that abortion is tragic, that no one wants to have an abortion. We all want to reduce the number of abortions as if there is something morally wrong with abortion. In this way, they have ceded the moral high ground to those who wrongly equate abortion with the killing of babies and reduce women to incubators.
We can support a woman's right to choose that makes abortion safe, legal, and rare, and reduces the number of abortions.
Our vision should be of an America where abortion is safe and legal, but rare.
So let us work together to reduce the number of women seeking abortions.
And as we Revcoms, led by Bob Avakian, have been emphasizing for years, fetuses are not babies. A fetus is a subordinate part of a woman's body. It has the potential to become a human being, but it is not a person until it is born and separate from the woman's body. Until that time, it is her body that is making it grow and develop, and it has no independent existence from her. She is the person. Second, abortion is not murder. There is nothing morally wrong with a woman terminating a pregnancy for whatever reason she chooses. And most important, women are not incubators. Women are full human beings who should never be made to feel bad or shamed, to say nothing of hunted down and locked up or worse, for getting an abortion, for deciding for herself when and whether to have a child. Still, even at this late hour, even after Roe has been overturned, and even as the Christian fascists across this country are putting their foot on the accelerator towards fetal personhood, many Democratic Party strategists and so-called pro-choice leaders continue to downplay the danger we face.
You ain't seen the insurrection yet. You keep on pushing our buttons, you low-down sorry compromisers. You God-hating communist America, you'll find out what an insurrection is, because we ain't playing your garbage. We ain't playing your mess. My Bible says that the church of the living God is an institution that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And the Bible says that we'll take it by force. That's what the Bible says.
It is time to take the blinders off. Time to shed any remaining disbelief. The movement that fought for decades to shame and harass women getting abortions, to terrorize and shut down abortion providers, to pack the courts and the government with women-hating theocrats. The movement that just won a huge victory by knocking down women's national right to abortion is hell-bent on going all the way. And they are not going to stop unless and until they are decisively defeated. This is going to take massive struggle, as is being fought for still by Rise Up for abortion rights. It's going to take struggle in the streets and massive resistance, and struggle in the court of public opinion, calling out this women-hating fascist shit for what it is, fighting for the science and the truth that fetuses are not babies, that abortion is not murder, and women are not incubators, fighting for legal abortion on demand and without apology everywhere. And ask yourself, what kind of a system puts fascist fanatics in power who believe that a fertilized egg should have more rights than a fully developed woman, and then backs this up with the power of the state? It is a thoroughly and utterly outmoded and bankrupt system. As Bob Avakian has deeply analyzed in works available at revcom.us, fully defeating these Christian fascists and winning the real and complete liberation of women is going to take a revolution. Overthrowing this whole system of capitalism, imperialism, and going to work in a new revolutionary society to break all the chains that bind women and put an end to all oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. Now is the time to get serious about waging this struggle. Now is the time to get into Bob Avakian and get with the Revcoms. Now is the time to unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution.
Who is Andrew Tate?
I don't know much about internet personality Andrew Tate.
Until a couple of months ago, we'd never heard of him.
And his often scandalous views about women that have made him notorious across the world.
Content promoting violence against women.
Andrew Tate is a former kickboxer and self-appointed misogynist life coach. He's made headlines in recent weeks after he was banned on several social media platforms for advocating violence and hate speech. Tate attracts boys and men who celebrate the hyper-individualist, violent and misogynist, rich, playboy baller wisdom he pukes. Tate rose to prominence on social media, where at one point, his TikTok had over 11 billion views and 4.6 million followers on Instagram.
Women aren't as big as me. You're like a 55-kilo female. I will pick you up with one hand by your titty, body slam your ass. When I grab you by your neck and you start annoying me trying to resist, and I just... and then I grab you by your neck again. Then what the fuck are you gonna do when your face is collapsed and your fucking cheekbone's broken? You ain't gonna do shit but cry. You're gonna fucking cry your eyes out.
Andrew Tate is a spokesperson of the society we exist in now, embodying, promoting, and personifying the patriarchal terror embedded in this global system of capitalism imperialism.
Fuck you, ho. You ain't gonna do shit but suck dick and cook.
Sucking dick and cooking? Barefoot in the kitchen? Stop to actually think of all the young girls who are brought up having their brains twisted by this view of them, generation after generation, trained to think of themselves as sexual objects and servants of the family, smothered by a culture that reinforces that belief at every turn, in advertising, in the music, in the home, and at school. Think of all the women who are sexually harassed and assaulted on the job, in the home, in the dorms, in the prisons, in detention camps, and in war zones around the world. Women denied their humanity and participation in society denied to the world.
because I will always be able to whoop your ass. And any man who's relatively capable as a man will always be able to whoop your ass, rape you, strangle you, kill you, anything he wants to do. Your only hope as a female is to scream and run.
Your only hope as a female is to scream and run? Think about all the women who are trapped in abusive relationships, told that they aren't shit, that they aren't good for anything but fucking, making food, and making babies. In researching for this video, I read the story of Venetia Reese, a 24-year-old whose partner tortured her with the intent of murdering her. I read her account of what she thought was going to be the last day of her life. She, along with her sister, were bound, beaten, stabbed, then set on fire and left to die.
My back, my arms, my head, and my eye right here. And then I have my stab wounds. I was stabbed 6 times on this side.
Think about the 47,000 women and girls murdered worldwide by intimate partners or family members just in the year 2020. Think about the constant terror inflicted in all women who from a young age are taught that the deadliest and most probable threat to their lives would be an encounter with a man. Think about Mahsa Amini, arrested and killed by the morality police in Iran. Think of all the girls held back from school, the women stoned to death for not being virgins, the millions who are violated, raped, bought, and sold as property, some as young as 9 years old, trafficked into sexual slavery. 5 million human beings, 99% women, and 1 million of them children, as Raymond Latta exposes in his must-read piece on revcom.us, The Industrialization of Sexual Exploitation, Imperialist Globalization, and the Descent into Hell. Now think about Andrew Tate, this self-described pimp made it his shtick to coach other men on how to become little slave master tyrants like himself, going on impassioned diatribes about how to intimidate and terrorize women, cashing in on thousands of years of oppression to feel just a little bit more powerful in a soul-crushing society. What a pathetic and depraved vision of being a human being. All of this brutality, dehumanization, and hatred directed toward women is completely, utterly unnecessary. It is not human nature for men to be dominant leaders, providers, or sadistic abusers. It is not human nature for women to be so docile, nurturing, so sweet, so wife-like, or subservient. It is the nature of this system of capitalism and imperialism which maintains the oppression of women and indoctrinates and rewards men who are willing to act as the hand, the enforcers of this system. But another world is possible. We could forge a world where women are not viewed as the property of men, called bitches and hoes, treated like punching bags and breeders, and have their humanity stolen from them day in and day out. We could forge a world where men are not socialized to be grotesque, dehumanized brutes, where people enter into relationships on the basis of mutual love and respect, where women and little girls never have to learn what it is to fear men, where creativity and an ethos of curiosity and experimentation are encouraged and celebrated in people of all genders, where women aren't discouraged and prevented from giving all they can to society, whether it's in the sciences and arts, in sports, or as leaders in the struggle to make revolution and change the whole world to put an end to all forms of exploitation and oppression all over the world. This is the world that we could create. The doorway to that new society is revolution. The key to that door is the strategy and method developed by the revolutionary leader, Avakian. The blueprint for this society has been written in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America, which, yes, actually has the right to birth control and abortion written into it. Get with the people working to make this a reality now in revolution clubs across the country that you can join. In these revolution clubs, we have 6 points of attention, principles we live by and fight to propagate in society today. Point of attention number 2 is we fight for a world where all the chains are broken. Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades. We do not tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or jokes about people's gender or sexual orientation. To all the boys and young men who look up to Andrew Tate, you have a choice to make. You can emulate Tate. You can make a tiny little life for yourself, reinforcing and contributing to the immense suffering inflicted on half of humanity. Or you can make your life actually matter. You can dedicate your life to ending this system and all the exploitation and oppression it necessitates. You can raise your sights and live another way, and be a part of breaking all the chains that bind women and the rest of humanity.
I saw that Public Enemy is coming out with a new CD that they're bypassing the whole industry and going directly onto the internet, and hopefully this will be something good we'll need to see. But probably one of the main reasons they're bypassing the industry is what gets promoted in the industry, what gets supported and promoted. In hip-hop, for example, misogyny, crude demeaning and degrading of women, openly promoting the idea of getting yours on the back or through the blood of other people. Get rich or die trying, I gotta get mine no matter what I gotta do. And often all wrapped up with religious obscurantism and crosses and references to nonsense in a poisonous package. And what do we hear? What's the excuse when people are confronted with this? Oh, I'm just keeping it real. I'm just telling it the way it really is down here. Keeping it real, my ass. You are helping to keep it going the way it is. And then there's Beyonce Knowles, or as I think she should be called, Beyonce Don't Knowles Shit. You know, after Osama bin Laden was killed, she picked up this song from this old country clown, Lee Greenwood, God bless the USA. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And she put out her version of this song on the heels of the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Come on. What we see here is these bourgeois strata seeking their interests in a way tied in with the horrors of this system, and fuck the masses of people suffering terrible oppression under this system. Instead of this, all this garbage, we need more fight the power. Instead of the promotion of getting in on the oppression, we need the promotion of fighting to put an end to it. Think about what's going on in the popular culture, particularly in hip-hop. The promotion of pimping. The brutal treatment of women. Tricked and forced into this and maintaining it through the most disgusting violence. Even turning it into adjectives, pimpalicious and all the rest. Think about it, the effect this has on the youth coming up and on the culture and the people broadly. Because a big part of all this is what we could call guy culture. It's a culture of degrading domination of women and of wanton violence, a kind of pornography of violence with an American chauvinist and male chauvinist thrust to it. Think about some of these video games where the point is you go out and you kill America's enemies. That's the point of the video game as identified by the army and the ruling class as a whole. Or the video games where a lot of youth are trained and conditioned to think while they're playing the game. They think they're just going like using their thumbs and fingers. They're using their brains though. Their brains are being influenced. You have video games not only go out and kill America's enemies, you have video games where the high point is you get to hunt down and kill a woman who's portrayed as a whore. How does this condition young people, boys in particular, to think about women and the relations between genders? Think about one of the main institutions and sites of male bonding in this society. Along with pornography, the strip club. That's where you go to hang out with and bond with other young guys or other older guys. Participating in and being titillated by the degradation of women forced to do this. What kind of thinking and conditioning is going on here in terms of how people who are being socialized in this way are being influenced to think about women and whether they're human beings and about the relations and what sex should be about? Look, let's face it. Sex, if it's done right, among people who really care about each other and on the basis of equality and what they want, let's face it, it's one of the greatest pleasures human beings can have, okay? But not when it's done by one part degrading the other part. And this is what people are being socialized to think of as the norm and as the object, the goal. And then we have the phrase, man up. Think about this. What is the logic of this phrase? What is the meaning of man up? It means you stand up and be strong and don't be a coward and don't back down from your responsibilities or from danger. And these are presented as attributes, qualities of men. Now, by logic, who does not have these qualities? Who are these qualities not of? Obviously, women. Think if you went out there and said, look, quit being so weak, woman up. It wouldn't make any sense in the dominant culture. It could make a lot of sense in reality, but it wouldn't make any sense in the dominant culture. Once again, people are being conditioned that to stand up for principle, to stand up for right, to not be afraid or shrink in the face of danger or sacrifice or taking responsibility are qualities of men that men should exercise. And it becomes so perverse that not only do you hear women being influenced to use this phrase, but you see it being promoted in the culture that if a woman wants to have these qualities, then somehow she has to try to man up. I think of the movie G.I. Jane with Demi Moore. This is a movie portraying the great advance for the cause of liberation of women as a woman who can make it in the tough confines and environs of the U.S. military. Become part of the machinery of oppressing and slaughtering human beings all over the world. And the storyline of this movie is Demi Moore plays this woman who has to fight through every attempt of her drill instructor in the basic training and the rest to drive her out of the military. And one after another, she passes these tests and she finds it hard and she needs to get support and advice, but she perseveres. And finally, it comes down to the crowning scene, so to speak, where once again the drill instructor is being extra hard on her, partly it seems to drive her out, but maybe to make her actually rise up to the challenge. And in this scene, he's just driving her and driving her and driving her, test after test. And he keeps saying to her, you want to quit? You want to quit? You want to quit? And finally she turns and says, no, fuck you, suck my dick. Which of course she does not have. But what is the point? The point is that in order to be really tough and worthy, you have to man up even if you're a woman. Or what about the phrase that's out there so much too? Being made into somebody's bitch. That's the lowliest thing you could be. A woman, and in particular a woman who's portrayed as being somewhat hysterical and frenzied, like a dog in heat. Being made into somebody's bitch, that's the lowest thing. And you see it even translated into all kinds of ways. For example, you go out on the basketball court. Somebody takes a shot. It doesn't go right in. It bounces on the rim. It's rolling around. And they'll say, get in there, bitch. Now think about it. Why are they saying, get in there, bitch? Because the basketball is acting like a recalcitrant woman. It's not doing what it's supposed to do according to the dictates of this man. It's supposed to get in the basket. And it's rolling around instead and it might fall out. Get in there, bitch. How is that conditioning people to think even without their being fully conscious of it? Imagine if some white guy went out on the court, started playing basketball, took a shot and was rolling around the rim. He said, "Get in there, nigger." Well, this is the same thing. And once again, you can get away with this in this culture now. It's acceptable. It's conditioning people. And along with this, the women under this system are conditioned, even girls from an early age, to internalize and to go along with so much of this, or to accept that this is the way things are and that nothing better can be expected from men. So try to own it, market yourself, and get the most you can out of this while remaining in what is in fact an oppressed and degraded position. Now, all this is not hardwired in people. It's not hardwired in guys any more than in the young women. It's ways that guys are conditioned by the dominant institutions and media and culture to think and act, reflecting the basic oppressive relations of this system and serving the interests of its ruling class. So developing a radical revolt against this revolting culture in many different forms and on many different levels is a very important part of and can make a very important contribution to fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution. Even if much of this culture that becomes part of this radical revolt is not all the way revolutionary and doesn't completely express the communist point of view, it can still make a big contribution by raising disgust at the putrid culture that dominates, by inspiring and provoking people to think differently and think critically, to question what they would otherwise accept, to ponder why the world is the way it is, to dream about and argue about the possibility of a radically different world, to come alive with righteous outrage and the joy of calling out and rebelling against what should not be tolerated. And this contribution will be all the greater if people who do have a communist understanding bring forward a vibrant culture that expresses that and inspires people toward that, while relating in a good way to the many and diverse expressions of a culture of radical revolt against this truly revolting culture.
This brings us nearly to the end of this episode of the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, episode 122. Before we close out, we want to cast our eyes back to the people of Iran, who continue to defy the violence and repression of the Islamic Republic of Iran as they rise up together, women and men, against the mandatory hijab laws which force women to cover their heads, but also against the whole Islamic regime. These are our people, who desperately need to be free of both the Islamic Republic and all of its horrors, and of domination by global imperialism, most of all US imperialism. We want to call your attention to an important statement by the Communist Party of Iran, MLM, who have taken up the new communism that Bob Avakian has forged. Go to revcom.us to read it. Here, I want to read just its conclusion, which keys off the massive and righteous upsurge of 1979 that drove out the US-backed, hated Shah of Iran. This upsurge included many different forces, including communist revolutionaries. But ultimately, this was hijacked by Islamic fundamentalists who brought in a new hell that the people there have been living with ever since. They write, quote, "We must never forget that in 1979, the majority of people who hit the streets felt the urgent need for revolution. But a real revolution never achieved victory. Instead, the counter-revolutionary process prevailed, resulting in one reactionary regime being replaced by another reactionary regime. Therefore, we, the revolutionary communists, call out to anyone who cannot tolerate the current situation and is angry, to anyone who wants to fight to rid women of the enslavement of the compulsory hijab and want to fight against patriarchy, to whoever wants to finally bury the ruling theocracy in Iran, to anyone who hates the suppression and the slaughter of political opponents, the poverty, unemployment, and the destruction of the environment. In addition to these, we call upon those who want a world in which all of humanity is free from subjugation to the capitalist system. We say to you, if you are not a revolutionary communist, it is necessary for you to become one for the revolution which is necessary to succeed. End quote. Again, we urge you to read the full statement as well as other coverage of the struggle there and where it must go at revcom.us. And so with that, I want to ask you to leave a comment below letting us know what you learned from today's episode, any questions or thoughts it provoked in you, and how you are fighting to spread this show as a key way of building for the revolution that is urgently needed for people here and all over the world. We will see you back here next Thursday night at the same time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. We will close out with this beautiful song, Bella Now, from the revolutionary future rock band Outernational, featuring Shekib Mosadeq with Baran Sajadi. This song was inspired by the struggle to free all political prisoners in the Islamic Republic of Iran and Afghanistan. Bella Now is dedicated to the fight against all oppression all over the world. We'll see you next week.
در شهر پرخون شاید دیگر بر نگرده شاید نبینه یک صبح دیگر یک صبح و یک مرگ دیگر چاو ترسی نداره کم نمیاره هستیم تا جان در تن داره شاید نبینه یک صبح دیگر یک صبح و یک مرگ دیگر که مالا ahora liberare capas ro besuzan capas ro que mala ahora liberare la ve capas ro besuzan capas ro que mala ahora liberare la ve bella ciao bella no Hostages on our own planet, burning alive.
The high-tech hangmen of Providence are angry. So am I.
Libera el ave, la fastró Jesús.